What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly. And today, we're going to be jumping right back into the fray, back into our Terry Gilliam discussion, me and Julian talking about the Age and Imagination Trilogy. In the last episode, we discussed Terry Gilliam as a filmmaker and what we think of his overall work. And then we jump right into Time Bandits, the first part of the Age and Imagination Trilogy. What is it to be a child? In this episode, we're going to be discussing Brazil. And then after that, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. So rounding out the full trilogy. So I'm not going to dilly and I'm not going to dally. I'm just going to put us right over. So welcome to the show. And let's start the discussion. Works really for what the thematic trilogy really is, because then we move on to Brazil. Came 4 years later in 1985, written by Terry Gilliam, Tom Stoppard and Charles McEwen, and this is a world apart in my opinion from Time Bandits. I hadn't watched this in quite a while. And there were certain things that that stuck in my head, certain scenes and certain elements, that when I watched Time Bandits again, I was like, oh, okay, I think this seems to be, there's something triggering here. I think Brazil's going to be similar. It's going to be like, almost like a sketch after sketch after sketch. But it definitely feels like a more consistent film. And I definitely like this a lot more. I almost feel this is filtered through other films. I can think, from a sort of almost from a stylistic. I can think of like Blade Runner. Those sorts of things. Probably Blade Runner. That sort of neo-future dystopia that's is that Gilliam's trying to tap into with this film. What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I had a very similar experience. I mean, I watched them or rewatched them in order, and it had been, probably, a decade to two since I'd seen any of them. And I found myself just a few minutes into Brazil saying, I like this better than the whole of Time Bandits. Because if nothing else, it is as you say, that it really struck me how influential, how this film wears its influences on its sleeve in terms of, there is a lot of Blade Runner in there, but there's also, a lot of, sort of like 60s dystopianism, 70s dystopianism gets in there. And then thinking how influential this movie is. It's sort of like, if you haven't seen Blade Runner in a long time, going back and seeing it, I think the fantasy sequences with the wings and everything are less influential. But, I remember thinking, this could be a scene straight out of Burton's Batman. There was so much of other movies that have influenced me or made an impression on cinema history that are so clearly influenced by Brazil. And I thought just in terms of the sort of like, it has a bit of the sort of like used future look that Star Wars had, that then goes through Blade Runner, and other films, Alien. This sort of like industrial, very 1984.
Yes.
That's very much the way I imagine 1984. And then, just the way it's shot. I mean, that room where everyone is goofing off when the director isn't looking. It's just this narrow corridor with a sloping ceiling that, has all of these, bizarre computer magnified screen devices in, and everybody's super busy in this space that is absolutely unsuited for human habitation, right? This way in which humans have to fit themselves to the architecture instead of the other way around. I just found all of this, just, if nothing else, intensely visually interesting.
I agree with that. I think this is it's a really beautiful film to see. And weirdly, because it's let's say 1984 is a clear inspiration for this film.
Yeah.
As you say. And although the story is, the story is relatively small in the grand scheme of things, but the film also visually and stylistically feels incredibly claustrophobic. As you say, sort of like the whole film is about being trapped in, and you get that. So where I feel that Time Bandits was tonally a little bit all over the place, with humour and stuff. This is a lot tighter, and is sort of, there's a clear intent with almost everything. Everything sort of feels like that it's there for a purpose. Pretty much everything. There's other bits, like say, of whimsy and imagination, but everything sort of from the sort of the visual stylings of the offices to the apartments to the restaurants and everything else is a level of claustrophobia. Even down to his car, the little one-person car and everything. That it just feels throughout it, telling this story of this person trapped. And then when you do get his imagination of him flying free over this sort of vista of greenery and sort of forestry, it's chasing that one, the perfect woman as he sees it. You feel that difference of he is only free and able to explore his world in his imagination, and then he gets pulled back to this horrible, blocky, vent filled world, and I just think it's fantastic. I really enjoyed this film.
Yeah, me too. I love the duct work. I love that. Which is sort of like classic postmodern architecture, but of sort of like having structures visible. But I have the same sense of just feeling trapped in this sort of dreamlike world, but all of the physics of that world work. I mean, it's clearly the real world. I mean, as much as it might be a hallucinatory sort of a parallel timeline or something. And, another thing that works, I mean, I think you're right about the role of imagination, that whereas, what is the role of imagination in Time Bandits, right? I mean, it's just, I'm a kid in the audience. This is imaginative and awesome. I don't know, besides that, what it has to say. I mean, the pain of Brazil is that the role of imagination right through the end is escape.
Yes. And
is escape from what Gilliam clearly feels of, the authoritarian structures, bureaucratic structures. My nightmares, I never have nightmares about public speaking. I'm a teacher. I never saw a microphone that I didn't, think I should be up there.
Yeah.
I'm a narcissist. But I have nightmares about bureaucracy. I have nightmares to this day that I am registered for a college course that I just have forgotten to attend, and I'm going to fail it, that there's a slip of paper somewhere that has my name and a class on it, and because of that, I'm going to be kicked out of graduate school. I share this sort of nightmare of bureaucracy, and, the role of imagination as sort of this place which you said very well, of this place in which the character's free to fly, and he's able to surmount these obstacles. He's sort of a heroic sort of superhero type in a way. Makes it sad and kind of, but bittersweet in a kind of beautiful way.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I can relate to that thing of when you are sat in, I being a teacher yourself, I work in a more corporate world, and so that level of bureaucracy, especially where things like unions are involved, exists. Okay, you've got to fill this form, and you've got to involve these people. You've got to let them know. You've got to make sure, and there's that structure. And I do, as a project manager, have those nightmares where I wake up at I've had it where I've woken up at 4:00 in the morning, thinking, oh my God, I've got to email that person. I've got to make that phone call. I've got to let that person know to make this one thing happen. And if it doesn't happen, then this other thing can't happen. And so then you do sort of stop yourself. And you sort of take a step back and you go, okay, that's a crisis, or it could be a big thing within this project or within this part of the company. But do you know what? In the grand scheme of the world,
yeah,
doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And you've got to sort of take that breath. And I think that's so. I've sat at those desks where you have that daydream, and you do think like, wouldn't it be cool if I could just fly out that way? If I was Superman in the universe when I could fly, or I could be, if I was, just that character and I could just go off and do whatever I wanted to do. I've had those daydreams where I thought like, this is killing me. So wouldn't it be cool to be scenarios?
Yeah, I really identify with what you're saying, man. I mean, I go to therapy, and one of the things that comes out in therapy is often exactly these points that I have so much stress, and it's over all of these totally bureaucratic, artificial things, right? And a lot of what I get out of therapy is just pulling out of that and saying, wait a minute, none of these things have intrinsic value, right?
Yeah.
We have created a world in which we wake up at 4 o'clock worried that somebody hasn't been consulted or a form hasn't been filed, right? Yeah. I mean, there is no natural state of us as a species, as animals who love our children and have dreams and fantasies and any of it, in which, any of these things matter, right? I mean, this is all utterly absurd, and I think that the absurdity of Gilliam is uniquely suited to pointing this out.
No, I agree. I think that's the point. Like I say, you look into this film, especially there are conversations between the main character, sort of Jonathan Pryce's character, and then Ian Holm, who's his boss, and they talk about exactly that thing, filling out a D12 form or a 34P form, and they oh my God, we've got to fill that in, make sure it's filled right, or they'll be blaming us. And I can just, although it's done as sort of a joke in the film, I'm like, no, I completely hear you. I completely sympathise with that. It's sad that that's the situation, but that's exactly what it is.
And you can certainly see a man of Gilliam's disposition chafing under that kind of environment.
Yeah, and I think that's why I think it is shown so well in this film that when he does have his imagination, his daydreams, and the more stress he comes under, the fact that stress and pressure starts to materialise in that imagination and that imaginary world. Two things happen though that I really like, that I think I really sort of empathise or sort of connect with in this film, is that moment of, even in my imagination, those barriers or those big walls start firing up at the ground, and you're like, I can imagine that's the case. I'm under pressure. I can no longer retreat into that imagination because I keep coming back to this same problem. But then it's that thing, he keeps seeing himself as the hero in that situation. I'm probably going to be giving up a bit myself in this, but that hero complex of like, okay, well, I'm the one who's going to have to stand up for this, and I'm going to make sure that this situation works out right. And even with his sort of like angelic wing armor, that he is going to stand up to whatever this evil is. In this form, it's the form of a large samurai warrior, and he's going to combat it. And I'm like, I so sort of connect with that character of like, no, I am going to be the brave one. I am going to be the hero. I've got to do this. It completely resonates with me, and I really feel for him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I find myself thinking like I want us to list like what we like and what we don't like, because so much of it is idiosyncratic. I mean, so much of it is hard for me to put a finger on. One of the things that I don't like is I identify with, wanting to be a hero and sort of, but I tend to put responsibility on myself for fixing situations, and I would totally, put more responsibility on myself for sort of, changing this whole society in a way that doesn't interest him. I like that aspect, but that main character, I found myself really loathing him over the course of the film. That, I found myself thinking, like, this man has left. I identify with him, but I also loathe him. This man has left a wake of destruction in his wake. He has sort of sabotaged his coworker. He's gotten this promotion. He's done absolutely nothing at his new job. He's blown up the ducks just because he was frustrated or losing his mind. He's fighting with his coworker, and the next off is over. He's forced that coworker to compromise himself and not been concerned about the implications. He ends up running through a barrier and just I find myself thinking, he's told by that wonderful the wonderful torturer sort of doctor character. Here's the file. Be sure not to lose it. Within 5 minutes, it's all over the street, right? And this is a horrible person. He is opposed to a fascist totalitarian state that it's not really clear to me whether there really are any terrorists or, clearly that is a terrible state. But at the same time, he's not really interested in fighting it, and he just seems to sabotage and destroy things.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it's funny. You talk about other films, these dystopian films, and the hero is often sort of it's them against the state of trying to bring down, disrupt the status quo to bring it to a more humanitarian sort of like position. Everything from, let's say, V for Vendetta or these other types of films. But yeah, you're right. He's not rebelling against the state. In this film, that's not his motivation in this. I mean, initially, the motivation is literally to clear up a clerical error. And it's only when he meets the potential girl of his dreams that it starts to spiral out of control. So you're right. This whole film is driven by his self-interest, rather than a desire to do good for the greater good of humanity. Like that, yeah, it is. Everything happens in this film because he is looking out for himself and trying to give himself a better future. Which, to be fair, at the start of the film, he doesn't even particularly want, does he? Because he sort of like he rejects the. He says, like, I've rejected the promotion. I don't want to go anywhere because this is the easy life. I've got no real ambition. It's only, sort of say, when this mistake happens and he meets the girl that he starts to sort of try and minded, as you say, but
Well, and I love this. I mean, I love that he's not. This isn't the usual sort of, blow up the totalitarian state, right? I mean, he's not a revolutionary. I love that. I mean, it strikes me as parallel to some of Philip K. Dick's protagonists, who are all petty people, right? And I love that aspect of it. I think what I don't like is how nervous the main character is. That, how anxious he is. I mean, he seems so uniquely unsuited. As you say, he has no ambition. He seems so uniquely unsuited to this society. And I found myself thinking of Camus' The Stranger, where, again, it's sort of about an outsider, but that's not an outsider who wants to blow up the system. It's just somebody who doesn't fit in by disposition. And there are scenes in which the protagonist is so nervous or anxious that I find myself having trouble identifying with him. When he's commanding, he's run away from, the lift has taken him into the basement, and he's run away back to the lobby to of the Ministry of Information to meet the girl of his dreams. And armed men intercept him, and then they see his badge, and he sort of, in a very namby-pamby way, says, "Oh, yes, very good, carry on," but he's so nervous, he doesn't, even when he's given authority, he doesn't know what to do with it. He doesn't, he's not even able to play the role of an authoritarian. He seems so unsuited.
It's almost like he forgets he's got the authority. Like, he feels like he's, he forgets he's in that position of power over some of the people that are chasing him down. I agree with what you're saying. I do agree that, like you say, throughout the film, it's always, he's not used to this position, but he's always shown as being slightly weak and, anxious. And I think in the film, like you said, there's the moment I think it's the docks. He's in the lorry with the girl. And he drives through, and it all gets blown up, and he's like, say, he's taking the wheel, he's got to do that, and then he has almost like that hero moment. He's like, "Oh, I did that, I achieved that," and then she makes him look back through the window and sees like there's people on fire, the things have all been destroyed.
Yeah.
And it's that realization again for him, like, you think this is a hero moment, but actually look at what you've just done. But if you were to be watching a film where it was the protagonist against the state, that would be the hero moment.
Right.
That's
no, exactly right. And there are consequences. I mean, we've talked about Man of Steel. I mean, V for Vendetta is especially in the comic is very clear. People are going to die.
Yeah.
This is not a purely good thing. And I do love the way in which that kind of undercut there. The hero moment is, the rug is pulled out from under you.
And I think that's what does achieve this one. I think you're right. Whilst I do, I do sort of connect with his character at times with some of the frustrations. I do like that they constantly do keep pulling the rug out from under him. Like, he keeps thinking he's onto something, or he's got that position, or a lead. It's like, I think of other like noir mystery films where you've got like the gumshoe or the tough detective that's going to track these things down, and they get into a situation and they'll get it out with a sort of their two fists and their wits, and he's the complete opposite of that. That he'll stumble into something, or somebody has to come and help him out, but he keeps getting bits of information, but it's always sort of like him literally stumbling from one position to another through other people's energies, and very little that he does on his own. Like even the Robert De Niro rebel plumber, I don't know, air conditioning technician, helps him out and does all this stuff, and again takes him to that next position, and he, his mum gets him that job in the Ministry of Information, and then in doing that he has to get somebody information from somebody else. It's always coming from somebody else, never him really being hugely proactive, really, in a great deal of things.
Right.
And yeah, so it is interesting to say he's never that hero, which is a brave move, and is truly Gilliam to say that, like, yeah, he's the protagonist, but he's never actually a hero.
Well, I mean, another movie I found myself thinking about is Alphaville, sort of rare French New Wave dystopian film, which I quite like, and which also, you know, the sort of dystopian society is just a kind of fait accompli. This is just the way it is. There's not really, you know, a revolutionary out to destroy this. But one difference that I hadn't realized, and it only came out in listening to you, was that the depiction of, usually when we get these sort of fascistic dystopias, there's a guy in charge, right? I mean, and that's partly because you have a revolutionary plot. You need to have a guy to overthrow. So, you know, it's the voice of fate in V for Vendetta. But, you know, usually beyond that, there's more of a sense of order. And one of the things that I love about this dystopia in Brazil is that you don't get a sense that any of this is really for anything. I love that, you know, the inciting incident is sort of confusing two people's names, and how unbelievably dark it really is. You know, that you find out later that, you know, the wrong man has been tortured to death, and, you know, that torturer is so wonderful, and how unconcerned he is with this.
I actually love that moment because it's Michael Palin who play in the torturer, and there are two moments with him that well, there's a couple of moments I love. When you first meet him, Jonathan Pierce meets him. You know, Jonathan Pierce is in his grey suit and he's off to do his archiving job, and it's very mundane. And he meets Jack, who is Michael Palin's character, and he's got a sort of like a nicer cut, raincoat, and he's looking a bit more sort of flashy and a bit pizzazz. And he's off to work in the Ministry of Information. He says, how are things? How's the kids? Oh, it's all fantastic. Yes, you know, we should catch up. We should do this. We should do that. And he's sort of seen as a bit of a go-getter, and you know, you think, oh, he's working his way up the ladder, and even Jonathan Pierce's mother says to him, you know, look at what Jack's doing. He's going up. He's got a promotion. He's doing this, doing that. And it's almost laid at him like, you know, you should be more like Jack. And then when you find out that Jack is actually a torturer for the Ministry of Information, you sort of go, oh, so that's what you do. That's your job. And it's almost become sort of, and then you find out later on that it's become so pedestrian to him, so mundane, such a sort of everyday job, that he literally brings his daughter to his office, where one room over he has been torturing people to death. And when they sort of press him on the death of Tuttle or Buttle, he says, well, it's not my fault. You know, I thought I was torturing Tuttle, and no one mentioned to me that Buttle had a heart condition. And if Buttle's heart condition wasn't in Tuttle's file, well, that's not my problem. That's somebody else's problem. That's their department. There's no. I love the fact that there's no remorse and no sort of like, you know, consequence. It's just like, oh, it was an administrative error. That's not my department. I just do my job. It gets incredibly dark. And it's shocking, really.
Well, I mean, yes, but you know, it reminds me of you know, sort of like, well, yeah, we droned the wrong people, but you know, mistakes happen in war, right? It is incredibly dark. I love when you first see him, he's in a sort of white lab coat, covered in blood, and he's like, oh, good to see you. You know, the mood is utterly incongruous, and you know, takes it off and plays with his daughter, and the level of just blithe unconcern is so wonderful. But then that sequence starts, and they touch back on it later with a woman who is transcribing the torture.
Yes.
And it's, you know, it's so, I mean, that is I mean, obviously it's a joke, right?
Yes.
But that is so dark. I mean, the idea that there's somebody listening to the transcript, to the recording of the torture and transcribing in bureaucratic fashion. No, please stop. Dot, dot, dot. You know? It's such a dark, comedic little joke, but it really works for me. But, you know, and again, it's that level of just sort of what we have gotten accustomed to, that you can, it's that sort of banality of evil that Hannah Arendt talked about.
Mm. I totally agree that that's it. That, you know, it's we can make anything every day. It's sort of everything, I suppose, becomes, like you say, the modernity of evil is. After a while, it just becomes. Funny enough, just before we started recording, we talked about surveillance Britain. You know, the joke that every inch of Britain is covered in cameras, and for a while there was a whole uproar about it, and everyone just went, "Oh well," and moved on. And it's now the thing, and it does have its benefits, definitely, but for a time there was really people pushing back against it, and now it's just the norm, it's just the standard. And then, so what's next? What is the next thing that everyone will go, oh, okay, well that's just the norm, I suppose, and we move on. And again, I suppose that's another element of the corporate, that sort of artificial corporate nature of things, that we just build things up and make things important just so that we've got something to do. And sometimes it's just, you know, it can be, it's a dark, horrible job, but well, someone's got to do it, sort of thing.
Right, and that way in which in a bureaucracy, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, and this goes back to Eichmann and to Arendt, that, you know, hey, I didn't set the rules.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't start a campaign of torture. I mean, I'm a functionary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we're all functionaries. I mean, there are plenty of things that, you know, our governments do that we might not agree with, but, you know, we give our tacit consent, you know, as we pay our taxes and do what's expected of us. And, you know, this gets back to what I was saying earlier about, like, what's interesting to me and what I hadn't realized until this conversation is the extent to which this dystopia has no function, right? You don't get the sense that there's somebody at the top, or if there is, you never meet that person. You know, why? Obviously, it's a sort of consumerist society, but why, with the plastic surgery and everything else, which is very interesting, but why all of these rules are the case? I mean, everybody is practicing cover your own ass, right? You know, it's not my department. You know, nobody is more concerned than when, you know, a check arrives for somebody who's deceased, and, you know, oh boy, now we're in trouble. How do we deliver this? She doesn't have a bank account, you know, the inheritor, who is, of course, you know, the person who's been tortured by mistake. The greatest concern is that there'll be a bureaucratic error. But again, there's no sense of, like, well, why, like, you know, I guess there's terrorism and that justifies this sort of regime of terror, but, and of torture, but, you know, you don't get a sense of why any of these rules are in place.
No, again, and I think this comes down to, again, the sort of, the Gilliam-esque nature of this is, again, you know, I said before about any figure of authority. I think it comes to any government structural authority. I honestly think he sees it almost as pointless. And I'm not saying he's an anarchist, but there is, you know, that thing of you say sort of, what is the point of this? I don't think there's supposed to be a point. I think this is something, like you say, that it's just grown into this thing, and everyone's just gone, well, I've got a job and I'm doing my thing and I get paid, and you know, it's literally just become that thing. But to flip it over, you know, you do say that, you know, throughout the film, there's this subplot or their, you know, story of the terrorist organisation that's rebelling against this authoritarian regime, that you don't even get a great hint about that either, to be perfectly honest. You get bits and pieces of it, but again, it's not driven by that. He doesn't become a member of the rebellion or anything like that. Well, at least not really. But there's a great scene when he thinks that the girl that he is pursuing is a member of this terrorist organisation, and she has a package, and they're in a shop, or they're in a sort of like a shopping centre, a shopping mall, and a bomb goes off, and he instantly thinks it was her, and there's a great moment in that, which again is incredibly dark, from because it's been you've gone from a moment of absurdity, this is where I think that Gilliam starts to really sort of balance things well. Of the friend of his mum's who's been having plastic surgery, and it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Like it starts off with she's got a slight patch on the side of her face, and then you see her again, and she's got her entire head bandaged, and then you see her next time, and she's in a wheelchair, and it keeps getting worse. And so there's this joke about it said that like it's just a small skin irritation, it'll be gone in a jiffy, and so you've got this absurd nature, and then a bomb goes off, and strewn across the shop are these bodies, bloodied, broken. You don't see it; it's not graphic, but you get the point of the confusion and the sort of this in an instant this has happened, and he blames her. And says, this is what you've done to people. And it's quite, again, it undercuts that sort of, this nature of this film. It constantly sort of, it throws sort of grenades at you, for want of a better phrase. It's like all of a sudden, like, this happens. And I found that quite sort of, not as much shocking, but it throws you back into the film. It jolts you awake again to go, oh my God, yeah, this is actually, there is still something here. That to have that happen, for the bomb to go off and actually have such a not a silly consequence was actually quite surprising.
Yeah, well, I think the sort of like tonal shifts that you identified in Time Bandits are working for the movie, where the idea, one thing that's interesting to me about it is that the characters don't seem to live in fear of these bombs. I mean, you witness multiple terrorist bombings over the course of this movie. But, people are still shopping, they're buying their Christmas gifts, it's not like, they're not, living like, Israel in the old days of sort of like, don't go out to dinner together because one of you will die. No, it's just like, oh, this is another thing we've been accustomed to. There will be these bombings. And then the way in which the protagonist does not move to help any of those people. He's only concerned about, did the girl of his dreams blow them up? And so he's scrambling for that package and confronting her, slipping on the blood in the bodies of just named people, which he's unconcerned with.
Again, I'd say it shows that like, the whole film is about his self-interest, rather than that sort of, again, the underpinning this issue that he's not the hero of this. No matter how much he fantasizes about himself in a heroic, fashion, in a heroic sort of like position, it never comes to fruition. It never happens. Like he never actually does anything that's wholly heroic. He never sacrifices himself. He never puts others in before himself. It's all at his. For his own self-interest, really.
Right, and the way in which he sees himself as a hero is just that he will get the girl of his dreams. And when he meets her, he doesn't know who she is. He doesn't trust her. He doesn't put his faith in her. I mean, maybe we should talk about the ending of sort of. I think you're told that he. There's this sort of fantasy, which is wonderful, with the paper falling, 9/11 style from the Ministry of Information, that renegade plumber who's doing unlicensed work in people's houses, rappels down as part of a revolution. It reminded me, I kept thinking of Clockwork Orange, in all of this sort of sense of torture and absurd sort of fantasy. but I think you find out, and then all of this is sort of a dream, and he's just catatonic. And I love the way the song after which the title is comes from. The sort of like whimsical fantasy, comes in there and sort of ties together the whole movie. And I think you hear that the girl's been killed, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, everyone's dead.
And that's it, yeah. So you're right. I mean, the ending is like eventually he gets captured by the Ministry of Intelligence and he gets taken in, and it's Jack, comes in, and I like the fact that in his fantasy world, there's been these characters that have acted almost like these dark beings that have been keeping him from this fantasy lady, his ideal woman, and they're these sort of cloaked weird characters, but they've got baby doll faces, and that all exists in the fantasy world, and they're incredibly creepy, and I really like the effect they have. But then it sort of hits home a bit that when he's strapped into the chair, he's been caught, he's strapped into the chair, and he's going to be tortured for information, and the torturer comes in, and he's actually wearing one of those baby mask faces that they clearly wear to hide their identity or for whatever purpose. But it to me, it makes me question, like, so how aware was he of this practice? If he gave those dark figures those faces, does he know that these torturing things exist and this is part of the uniform, or is it just a coincidence, or is it part of the the fantasy? I really like that. But then I say, when he's confronted by Jack, and Jack says, "Well, you've really screwed up on this one. You've really, how am I? You've really buggered me up." And again, it's Jack being a bit selfish. And he says, "Look, just tell me what I want to know." And I think that's where it sort of obviously it transitions then into the fantasy once the torture starts, of him being rescued in the most heroic fashion, and you get that sort of what he's always been hoping for. Is to be rescued, and again the rogue Robert De Niro plumber comes in, and he is now going to be the saviour of the resistance, and it's that sort of like it's what you expect there to be, that heroic moment of you're the only one we can rely on, you're the you've got the information or whatever, and then for you again the rug is pulled out from under you to be found that actually no all that last segment that you being rescued and meeting the girl and that sort of all of that is a complete fantasy, and that's him, literally like being locked into that fantasy world, and it's all the stuff that you were thinking at the beginning of the film. You need the daydreams, and you've got that fantasy world where you can roam free. Is actually may not be as good as you think it is, because actually you can get locked in it, and you get distracted from the fact that you do have responsibilities, no matter how manufactured they are, to the real world.
Yeah, I mean, when we were talking about Miracle Man, I said that one of the things that I like about it is the way in which all of these sort of like superhero tropes and kind of, power fantasy, being the hero, all of these things are subverted and made really sad.
Yes.
That it still has all of those things, and those things are whimsical and wonderful, but at the same time, really sad, because, they're part of, a fantasy that is at odds with reality and is exposed to be a kind of escapism from a workaday, unsatisfying life. And I think that, for me, talking about the role of imagination, this idea that all of this imagination, all of this fantasy, all of the whimsy of, the man with golden wings that, is so identified with this film, exists to sort of escape this horrible bureaucratic nightmare reality. And has no other function than that. It's not socially redeeming. It's just a kind of escapism. And that strikes me as very sad. I mean, I think, that last shot is so brilliant. I'm such a sucker for beginnings and endings. And that last shot, sort of classic Gilliam wide-angle lens of the sort of like almost Cerebro-like, or inside of an atomic reactor-looking, thing of the main character catatonic at a distance in this huge landscape that dwarfs him, in sort of fascistic fashion. As the music sort of swells, and then this time there are bongos and monkey sounds, and it seems as if, yes, I mean, we go to whether it's the opera or to movies to sort of like escape some of our reality, and boy, that's driven home to me by that ending.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is, isn't it? You're totally right. That's exactly what it is. It's sort of you can escape for so long, but you've got to go back because say that it's only an escape for a short amount of time, and and if you do give into it, then you are completely disconnected. To that like saying the catatonic world that he's in. So to wrap up on sort of Brazil, then really, I mean, I think we've taken a step forward then from Time Bandits. In that this is I think this is a much better film, a much sort of. I mean, it's 140 minutes long, so it's not a short film, but there's so much in there to talk about, and there's so much I think you can take from this. But do you think this is a better film, or do you think this is also you watch this at a certain time of life and you get something more from it?
No, I think this is a better film. I think that, this is sort of, I think it's usually regarded as Gilliam's classic. I don't know that I quite see it that way, but, in the sense that I think there are other Gilliam movies that I like and I might put up there of equal value. But, there's no doubt that this is a classic film. And this is if you are interested in cinema, you can know cinema history without knowing Time Bandits, right?
Yes.
You can't really do that without having seen Brazil or Blade Runner or Clockwork Orange. I mean, this is in there among those films.
I agree. No, I totally agree. This is, and it seems. Not only is it sort of, I think, a representation of Gilliam at possibly at his height, not his peak, but in his doing his A game. I also think it's a typical sort of 80s representation as well. It kept coming through that. I know there are stories of dystopian futures that sort of come out all the time, but this just felt, I don't know, there was just something to me that felt intrinsically 80s about this, and for someone that was obviously living through Reagan era America and Thatcher era Britain, that I don't think would have come out at other periods in history. So you're right, it represents a lot, really. I think it's a really good film, and I'm really glad to go back to it.
And there are so many moments. I mean, we haven't even talked about those narrow offices. The idea of sharing a desk.
Yeah.
I think that's so brilliant. The billboards all along the road. Sort of the ultimate absurdity of advertisements everywhere. There's so much in this film that while those are grace notes, and I think you could ding a grace note here or there as out of sync with the overall project of the film. There are so many of these grace notes, of these little whimsical elements that that's just transcribing of the torture and things like this. That the child in the room that just really resonate and are just classic, wonderful, beautiful, albeit horrifying images.
No, I agree. I think there's so many, like you say, and I'm sure someone has written about this in great detail, but there's so many little things to pick out. Like I say, the billboards that run along the road, and you see them, you say, the continual advertising, But I like the fact that they're not just there to act as advertising. That when you pull back, you see the wider world either side of them, and it's just a wasteland, like polluted wasteland. So it does to show that they're actually there as a distraction, to hide the truth of what exists behind them. And I think that's another, if he's going to do any satire, I think that sort of starts to dip its toe into that satirical world. And he gets stronger at it from Brazil, I think.
Boy, that's brilliant. I hadn't even thought of that implication. I mean, I remember the wasteland, but the idea that really all of this advertising, all of the plastic surgery exists to hide this horrible reality.
Yeah.
It's quite resonant.
And that's why I think this film still stands up today, because there is so much in there that is still resonant today, that you can still pick that out, and you can still look at the world around you and say, yep, that has got that's got a mirror image in this world in some fashion. Especially with the plastic surgery, the sort of his mum looking younger and younger, and sort of, in this sort of cosmetically driven and sort of incredibly sort of fashion conscious world. That's clearly the case, isn't it? So
yeah, quite.
It definitely rolls true. So let's move from one film that I think still resonates with the real world around us to the final chapter of the Imagination Trilogy, 1988's The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, written by Terry Gilliam and Charles McEwen, and based on the novel from 1785 by Rudolf Erich Rasp. This is the one that focuses on sort of the older generation, sort of, and the use of imagination and telling stories and looking back on one's life. The Baron Munchausen of the title, sort of telling those sort of tall tales of things that have gone on in his past. What were your thoughts on this film?
Well, I'm curious to hear what you thought. I thought that this was sort of a cross between Brazil and Time Bandits. It has some of the same episodic structure of Time Bandits, where, as Munchausen is sort of putting the old gang of basically superheroes back together, you go through episode after episode. I do think that there isn't the same sort of like wild tonal shift of the original or Time Bandits. And I found that there was some resonance there from Brazil, that it was a better film than Time Bandits. I like the idea of Munchausen having reached old age and passed into legend, although he's still alive. And I love some of the sequences. I mean, some are clearly, badly dated. I mean, I think the Robin Williams stuff on the moon, the shots on the moon are beautiful, but, then, there's way too much just Robin Williams being Robin Williams as a floating head, and you're like, yeah, get back to the climbing the arc of the moon and to deserts made of, gray sand. So, I mean, there's great stuff, but there's also some stuff that doesn't work. And I object to the ending. I mean, I think the ending has all the problems of Time Bandits and worse. But I like the idea of the stage. I mean, I like I think the sequences work better. I like the basic idea of sort of looking back on your life. So for me, it's sort of like a Time Bandits 2 with some of the depth of Brazil, some of a little tighter storytelling or tonal control. And also for me, I mean, as a literary guy, I like that there's a version of Baron Munchausen in the same way that I like Don Quixote. I like the idea that as we live in this sort of like superhero world now, which we didn't at the time in cinema that this was made, What's your take on it?
No, I totally agree with that. It's a mix of sort of, say, the Brazil and Time Bandits, in that sort of it's a tighter film than Time Bandits, although it contains those episodic like the stories, almost like an anthology kind of way at times. But again, like I said, those themes come through, and the fact you've got like Jonathan Pierce coming back as a sort of a French bureaucrat this time, you know, and there's a moment in this film, I love the fact that sort of like, just again, like, it's clear that Gilliams got a problem with bureaucracy, because at the moment, the end of the film, I'll jump to that, is when they're arranging to surrender, and they're saying, so you'll surrender next Wednesday, and it's your turn this time, is brilliant. But there's a charm to this film that I really love, and I think I've always enjoyed this film for that reason. It's sort of this film is Baron Munchausen is a con man, and there's a film about the thing about this film is it's bullshit, and I love that this is clearly sort of like, say, someone's tall tales that's, you know, he stood by to sort of impress people, or you know, just to big himself up, and I'm willing to go with that, because it's such a fantasy nonsense. That the problems do definitely come at the end, and so, like you say, the tonal shifts that were a problem in Time Bandits, he's addressed, I think, in this by admitting from the outset that, yeah, this is just some old bloke telling stories. You know, like, don't take any of this seriously. Like, this is all to be taken with a pinch of salt. Like, you know, okay, yeah, so he you know, he had this this group of super friends that could do the things. You've got, you know, one can run really fast, one has got super hearing, one's super strong, one's got super sight. You've got all these things, and they've gone on all these adventures and this wonderful, crazy stuff. So don't try and apply too much common sense to it, because even as a filmmaker, like, they're admitting that it's bullshit. And I just kind of like that it's sort of, it's quite, you sort of, I don't know, there's not sympathy, I'm thinking the wrong word, but there's a sort of just a charm to it that I kind of like, of you know, that tall tale, that idea that, yes, we travel to the moon, and yes, I was actually, I'm that strong, I'm able to lift myself out of the water by picking myself up by my hair, and you know, I can make it. I was trapped inside a whale, and I made it sneeze with a bit of snuff, and it's lunacy, it's ludicrous, but it's the right level of ludicrous for me to enjoy it. I think that's why I really enjoy it.
And that stuff goes back to those original stories.
Yes.
You know, the idea of playing with physics and having a laugh at, you know, pulling yourself up, you know, goes back to those original stories. And I can buy it within that world of tall tales. Mm. And I kept thinking, watching this again, of Big Fish, which, you know, has some of the same sort of idea of a man at the end of his life. But there, I think, has maybe a little more emotional resonance because he's with his kid, who's struggling to deal with, you know, how do I understand these tall tales? I think that the girl, while charming in Munchausen, I have a little bit of the same sort of reaction that I do with Time Bandits, where I think, you know, where is that father who, you know, we've seen early on, you know, sort of, you can kind of understand why he runs away, but then she doesn't miss her dad, you know, the dad doesn't miss her. I don't even think he's seen again.
No, I agree. I mean, she's a typical sort of like movie kid. Like, you know, they've got a level of bravery and things more so than the adults around them, which it either works or it doesn't. And I agree that in this, she becomes a little bit irritating at times and sort of almost a hindrance to the story. But I also, like I say, I like the fact that the problem is that we had with Time Bandits was that it didn't stick to its own. There was no internal logic, but there almost is with this.
Yeah, I agree.
And there are elements as well that the things that sort of spring out to me about this as well that I really like, actually thinking back, is this idea of not even legacy, but sort of adulation for So at the beginning of the film, like he's fallen into almost a figure of fun, So there's a play about him that's being laughed about and all this other stuff, and when he finally does break onto the stage and interrupt the play and tries to give his tale of it, and the building starts to collapse, he wants to give in to death. He's given to that point, and I love the figure of death in this. Again, it's a really creepy depiction, the angel of death, that he wants to give in. He's just like, look, just let me die. Or did I die? He's like, no. He's like, bugger. It's great that, but as he gets into the adventure, and as he's able to tell these tales, and these things happen, he gets younger. His hair isn't grey, his moustache gets its lustre back, and he's more willing to do things. So when you get to the sort of the third act, he's 20, 30 years younger. And I love this idea that to be in the mix again, to be relevant again, to be listened to, and to have that level of adulation makes him younger and gives him that verve back. And I think that it's really true that as you do get older, and you might feel that you lose some of that relevance, and people aren't listening to you again. You sort of become isolated, and you probably feel older than you do. And I'm projecting, but I just love that tone of it as well. That there are moments in this film when he does feel lost and he gets old and broken again, like when he's in the whale. But then again, when he's able to break out and he gets back, he's young again. It really sort of that sort of speaks to me a bit, really, I suppose.
Yeah, I like all of that. I also find myself thinking of, sort of the idea of an older figure who, had dreams and had adventures too.
Mm.
And, this sense of like, I've got elderly parents, and I admit there are times where, it's like, all right, I don't want to hear this story again.
Yeah.
I've heard this story 20 times. I never knew this person. I haven't thought of them in 20 years.
Yeah.
All right, man. I don't want to hear this. But, those people, whether they're our parents or just people as they get older, had hopes and dreams and loves and adventures. And I like what you're saying about the sense of validation that comes from just being able to tell those tales and have somebody interested. It clearly means, before the sort of like magical, this was all a story sort of cut there at the end, it means a lot to Munchausen that the girl cares and wants him to live, you know?
Yeah, I agree. That's the thing, is this let's say that idea of adulation, of someone looking up to you, is clearly important to him. But again, he's not. We've gone through this again. Sort of, we said it with Brazil and stuff, that have been the motivation being self-interest. In this, like Munchausen, he is not. Although he suggests he's doing this for the greater good, to save the town, like he is a con man. Like he's not a particularly nice person. And again, it's sort of that undercutting of the hero trope of throughout the film. He keeps lying to the little girl and saying, like, the town's fine. Believe me, they're all safe. We've got to, we're going to do this, going to do that. And it flashes back. It cuts back to the town under siege, and that they're all under cannon fire, or the doors getting battered down, and this is happening. And you do sort of, although he may do these things and have these tall tales or these moments, like it's all again in service of his own ego rather than any greater good. And so he's never actually a particularly good. He's never a hero, really, is he?
Right. No, not really. And I mean, like he goes off with Venus. He's clearly not concerned about the mission anymore.
Yeah.
And he's left. I mean, again, it's hard because we have to kind of like specify what level of reality we're talking about in this film. But within his tales, I mean, closed in on them in 20 years.
Yeah, because again, like you said, it's got that Blues Brothers moment of getting the band back together. And when he does find them, one of them's been trapped on the moon for 20 years. One of them's been in the service of Vulca, the god. Two have been trapped in a whale. It's like you say, he is clearly sort of moved on, and even at one point, Eric Idle's character confronts him on this and says, "So you're going to leave me here for 20 years? You turn up, you say you saved me, and now you expect me to sort of follow you into danger again?" And his response is just like, "Well, yes, of course." And and Eric Idle's is like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, and I quite like the sort of twist of him surrendering to the Turks, and sort of using that to inspire the others to. I mean, there is a sense of, that sort of fairy tale logic of just, well, this is an interesting thing to do. Or the Moon King's mechanical flying beast that tears itself apart, And those elements work for me in this, whereas they didn't in Time Bandits. That in Time Bandits, because it seems so... I mean, I guess here it's a tall tale, so I mean, you're in such a fantastical world that the idea that this is just whimsical and clever is interesting enough.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that in this film, it's like you say, it comes down to that internal logic, and because it's the coincidences. In Time Bandits, they sort of they've got the get out of the map that gives them the doors into different parts of history, and so you have to give them that. And in this, it's just a whole coincidence that he flies to the moon, and after he literally falls from the moon to Earth and lands in a volcano where his next the next member of his team is there as a manservant, and then when he gets eaten by a fish, it's the fish that just happens to have, like, those coincidences again, because or at least you get that this is a tall tale. Those coincidences are going to happen because I would expect this to be told, although the film has got is relatively tight and the scenes are all well laid out and stuff. If you were to be sat watching Baron Munchausen telling this story, you can picture that it would be told in a rather rambling, probably quite disjointed way, where you'd have to be almost taking notes to keep up with the tale as it rolls out, because it'd be like, and then this happened, and whilst I was there, then there was this, and then the Sultan did this, and I can imagine it being like that this, I'm willing to give it that, yeah, this is just some old bloke, like, recounting his tale that's, probably not got the same faculties he had 20, 30 years ago, so it's gonna be that little bit disjointed, and I actually quite enjoy that element of it.
Yeah, I like that too, although I'm realizing, like, with the ending being what it is, that it's strange that if this is all a story that he's telling from that stage, right, the cut from reality into fiction occurs before that stage is bombed. Because when you cut back to, the end of the story, the theater is intact.
Yeah.
Why would you tell a tall tale about what I'm going to do in the present situation? It then ends with your death.
Yeah.
And then how does the Turk disappear? Is that through the power of imagination?
It's again, I agree with the ending, because I like the end of his speech when he tells the tale. It actually says, and that's one of the many times that I died saving a town, and it's sort of, but it goes almost to something we've talked about. That goes to something that we've talked about in the past, of that superhero cycle of sort of, we've talked about the fact that, like, superheroes, like, Superman's been dead and come back, Batman's been dead and come back, like, Captain America, they've all been dead and come back. Where, you can imagine, I can almost imagine this being that superhero going, yeah, well, there was that time, and we defeated Darkseid, but I died, and I was then resurrected, and then we went off and we fought him again. And it almost feels like, it's even before that became a bit of a cliche and a trope, that it's making fun of a comic book, like almost like a superhero trope that probably wasn't even been acknowledged at that point.
Oh, right. I agree. I agree completely, and I love the death stuff. I love that line. I just don't know what we're supposed to believe happened. Why would you tell a story about, what you're going to do, about getting the gang back together to fight? Like you were pointing out, and I quite love the cuts to, especially when the music persists, the zany music in the scene, and he says, "Oh, don't worry, the town's fine," and you cut back to people being blown up.
Yeah.
That works really well, but apparently that's not happening. Why would you tell a story about what you're going to do?
This is the Gilliam problem, I find. This is the problem with Gilliam, that again, he doesn't know how. He's either never entirely happy with a conclusive ending. Like, if that film had ended with the complete third act, so you'd have to lose him. But if it ended with his death, then, or even a narration that actually had that line, and that was just one of the times I died saving a small town, I'd be quite happy with that. Because you would still have that hook of like, well, what does he mean? One of the times I died saving a small town, you'd still have that, but you could accept that, yes, that whole fantasy happened and he did take on the Turks. Or, you could have the third act and it just be him beating the Turk and then riding off into the sunset afterwards. But like you say, Gilliam's so determined to keep that imagination thing alive that it becomes confused, because sorry, even after that, so they open the gates. It cuts back to him back on the stage. They have a whole thing about opening the gates to prove the Turks have been beaten, and the Turks have been beaten, and then they have a short moment of him sort of, being as if everyone accepts that he's done it, roundly sort of applauded, and then when he rides off, and he literally just disappears as he rides over a hill, and then it leads me to believe, like, so was he real? Is this a tale? Is it? It's Gilliam's so determined to have absurdity and imagination inserted that I sometimes think that he starts to stumble over his own narrative, and I think this is another simple sign of that this could lose some of that ending and would be a much, much stronger film. Yeah.
Well, and you also have the sort of like Wizard of Oz moment as like Uma Thurman, as Venus, is sort of there in the audience as he's dying, But, I think you're right about the stumble. I mean, I cannot make heads or tails of the ending. And, and I think if this was all a fantasy, why is the Turkish horde gone?
Yeah.
If this is all real, why is the theater not destroyed? It seems very, very odd to me, and it seems that, I like the idea of this is only one of the many times that I died, and that this is sort of like all actually itself a story within a story. But it seems to me we could resolve that by the role of imagination in Brazil touches me in a way that this doesn't. I found myself kind of thinking at the end, like, okay, so was it the power of imagination that made an army disappear?
Yeah.
Was it the power of your story that made an army disappear? And that kind of dovetails with the depiction of the general, the sort of French general, who has a hero executed because it makes the other troops feel bad. I think, like, okay, this is a little overdone in the sense of, like, the forces of reason are, this is like the age of reason, right? The forces of reason are just baddies. Reason is just bad.
Yeah. And again, that's the whole thing, going back to this idea that, I don't think they call it the age. Obviously, this is a Napoleonic army, in some sort of, they're supposed to be French in some outpost, I believe, in sort of the Middle East. It feels like that push, that nudge. He wants to have that period piece because obviously Munchausen is from the late 1700s. So again, he sort of what corporate entity can I, or what authoritarian entity can I push fun at? All right, it's going to be that Napoleonic structure again. I could very much imagine. that Jonathan Pierce's bureaucrat reports into Ian Holmes' Napoleon.
Yeah, sure.
That in this absurdist world, and I do like some of the logic about there are moments of real greatness in this film I do like that when the heroic soldier at the beginning is presented and he's played by Sting, which is interesting. He took 6 cannons and he's killed all these enemy, and the guy's like, well, don't do that. That sort of gets the people riled up. All these people that want to live a quiet life, these bloody heroes keep making things difficult for us. And again, it's that I love that as a satire. That sort of like no, it's status quo. You didn't fill out your B-37 form to go and do that sort of thing. It's there's little moments like that in this that I really, really enjoy. Again, and then it's sort of all sort of, I won't say undone, but it sours at the end when you do get this ending that you're left sort of going, what? I don't get what it means. So I almost think that Gilliams is his own worst enemy in that respect.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, I thought that bit early on, with the hero, and I didn't recognize that it was Sting, but I saw Sting in the end credits, and thought, who in the world is he? So thank you for that. But, I thought it was clever enough, but, it seems to me that if you're going to satirize sort of authorities and, authoritarianism or bureaucracy, the way in which this tends to work is, the heroic soldier gets, sort of Inglourious Bastard style used in order to manipulate everybody else who's suffering, in the trenches, so to speak. And they become this kind of propaganda piece, sort of Russian style to inspire, the average soldier to be Stakhanov. And the reality is the average soldier goes to war for patriotic reasons or whatever, and then winds up dying or getting very little out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that is a more apt, the truth is a more apt satire than, I get what's being done. I think that, what Gilliam's doing there is sort of like anyone who's different, even in war, if you use your imagination and you're different, you stand out, and, the what is it, the nail that sticks out gets the hammer.
Yes.
Right. So, I think that's what's being done there. I think you're right that it's, it's obviously mocking, and you see that later on with the sort of like, your turn to surrender kind of business. But I mean, it seems to me that this isn't especially keen satire of why authorities or, war is stupid and, these authorities are stupid. It's not that they're this dumb, right? You see what I mean?
No, I agree. I think that's the problem. I mean, as you say, the moments I take from that as well are that, I don't think it's a mistake that they chose Sting. I think, he's a good-looking guy. They've got him there, and he's even referred to as heroic soldier in the credits. And I think that you have this idea that in another film, in another version, he would have been the protagonist. Like, he's the one that would have saved the town. But in this one, because of his actions, actually, he's going to be executed because he's a bit of a pain in the ass. And so
I love that idea, by the way. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I like these little moments that you can take from that. But you're right that it's not as keen-edged satire, or it's not as sort of pointed as other films have been, or even as Brazil is in some cases. That it feels a little bit scattershot. And as I said with Time Bandits, I get the feeling with some of this that some of it is plotted out and put in the script, and then other bits are they've come up with this idea on the set, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to do this. Let's do this. That's a good thing to do." And so it never quite, it never feels as sort of, it never feels as sort of as impactful as it should be. Like you do watch these things and go, much more could have been done with this, or they could have just tightened it that little bit. If anything, I feel a bit. You mentioned RoboCop before and the satire in that. I feel it's the same. It's a similar thing in that in the first one, like Verhoeven really nailed it, and you get that satire, and it's sort of it's a clear vision of satire with the excessive violence and the media and the corporate attitude. Like it's all there and it's lined up, and people are being shot down, boom, 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 boom. But as the sort of the franchise goes on, it just becomes, oh, it's a RoboCop film, so we've got to have the adverts in, or we've got to have the news points in. And so, all right, well, there's supposed to be a satire, so we'll do this. But then they're never quite as keen and as pointed as they should be. And that's what this feels like. It's like, well, I can make this point because I think it's a bit funny, and it's going to poke fun at something, but it's never quite, you know what I mean? It's sort of,
right.
And I just think that's a real shame. Again, like tighten that up, and this again could have been a masterpiece.
No, I agree with you, and I think that it has more masterful scenes. I mean, I love the landing on the moon. I mean, I love the, I mean, Uma Thurman is great, and I didn't, it's a very young Uma Thurman.
I think this is her first speaking role on screen.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a fantastic role. And I didn't even recognize her at first. And then I thought, my God, that's Uma Thurman. So bizarre. But I mean, it's definitely worth seeing. I did find, as a sort of late thought on this, I did find that I thought, am I just speaking out of my bias that of the sort of trilogy of Age of Imagination, that the one that speaks to me the most is the one of like a 30-something guy, whereas when I was a kid, I mean, I had no problem. I mean, I watched Brazil, but I had no problem with Time Bandits. None of that stuff irritated me. Are there things, I mean, obviously Gilliam wasn't the age of Munchausen. I mean, he was sort of projecting, but are there things in Munchausen that we might appreciate as we were older, or are we being mean to that childlike perspective of Time Bandits? Is this just, me at this stage in my life, as I kind of talked about, like, reality and, imagination and how that changed for me, identifying more with the one closer to my age?
It's very possible, because I do feel the same. It did cross my mind that, you and I say we are able to connect really with Brazil because we live in that world, that we're of that age where we can look at that, like you say, what we hate and find most frustrating. And I felt the same about Time Bandits when I was a kid and I watched it. I thought it was a cracking adventure sort of fantasy film I could sort of watch along with probably like Labyrinth or those sorts of things where you do go back and you watch them and you can enjoy them in a certain aspect, but there's still sort of gaping plot holes that now become a bit more of a stumbling block for your enjoyment. And I think that is part of imagination. And maybe you're right. Maybe we'll reconvene on this in 30 years, and we'll go back to Munchausen and be like, yeah, do you know what, Brazil, it's too old, it's too bitter. But Munchausen, it really speaks to me about being relevant and old age. Maybe.
Yeah, I wonder. I wonder about that. And I wonder if even the ending. As an old man, maybe you revert to who cares about that? Wasn't it? You still have some of the tonal consistency that you sort of got from Brazil. You have some of the coherence, but those things that don't quite make sense. Yeah, I'm willing to let go of. Kid, watching stuff like Labyrinth or Dark Crystal or and you have maintained 100% narrative coherence.
Your tastes and your perspectives change, and maybe that will be the case. That I'd be interested what older people do think of Baron Munchausen. I mean, of the films, of the three of them, I think Gilliam's never been a breakout success. He's never been a mainstream. He's never been like $1 billion or even like multi-million-dollar success story. And I think because I think each of these films maybe do speak to different people at different times. It's quite difficult to hit those four quadrants, as it were. And I think so that.
Well, I'm struck by how even the stuff that I don't like, there's something that is worth seeing. Time Bandits is interesting. If only as kind of like an artifact of the '80s and Python, and Brazil is kind of a classic. Munchausen has themes that I'm so glad I revisited, in preparation for this podcast that I had just forgotten and that, stick with me. And themes and ideas that I like. And maybe some of the flaws, watching it as a whole, they sort of bother me, but they don't stick in my memory as well as the interesting stuff or the stuff that is visually stunning. And one thing about Gilliam is that he's always visually interesting. This guy can shoot a Pepsi can and make it look like it takes in the whole world,
Yeah. Oh no, I have to admit, there are moments in each of these films which I find like jaw-droppingly beautiful or well shot, or there's just in every film there's a scene or something I just go, that is awesome, and it's the use of practical effects as well. Not to harp on about sort of the CGI is bad, I don't think that, but the set design, especially in sort of Brazil and Baron Munchausen, the set design and the practical effects and the miniatures and that sort of thing. I just love watching that thing. I just love watching the idea. So you said that the idea of when they land on the moon and in the ship and sort of gliding through the wet sand, and then just the design of the fake town or the fake city, and then the Sultan's palace, everything. I just think it looks so good. I just really enjoy that element of it. It's just so it's designed to be a fantasy, and it looks the part. And the same with Brazil. There's no element that isn't designed. You know what I mean? It's like nothing's left to sort of go, it'll be good enough. It all looks brilliant, and it's all well thought out.
Yeah, and they're clear choices, and Gilliam is kind of famous for the wide angle shot, and even in like the Agamemnon stuff, those buildings, which look to me more like Sumerian than Greek, but those buildings are amazing, and there's a giant crowd scene, and that whole business with stealing his gold. I mean, the whole sort of interior palace shot is great, and there's so much to recommend it, even when we think it and maybe the whole doesn't hold together for us. And maybe that goes back to what you were saying about the sketch and letting things develop on set of just sort of loving the shot, loving the scene. And if there are problems that we have with Gilliam, it's that sort of like whether it comes together as a whole enough for us. But there's no doubt that, shot by shot, scene by scene, I mean, even the stuff that we object to in Time Bandits, it's not that it's a bad scene in and of itself. Like you said, that would have been a perfectly adequate Python sketch, I mean, even the stuff in Munchausen after the cut at the end, as a optional addendum to this, there's no problem with it. I mean, it's got some nice shots, it's got some nice ideas. I don't think it works with the whole, but it is fascinating and interesting and beautiful in its own regard.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think so. To wrap up, then, I think really what we're saying is that I would recommend to everyone as a whether it be a Gilliam fan or as a film fan, to check out these three films. To really, I think people talk about Time Bandits. A lot of people talk about Brazil. I don't think Munchausen gets talked about enough. I think people should go recommend these films because there is something great. There is something good in each of these films. But in my opinion, I think Brazil stands head and shoulders as the best of the three.
No, I agree completely. And obviously, I mean, Brazil is up there, with sort of the best of cinema. I mean, if you see one Gilliam movie, it's got to be that because everybody talks about that, and it is sort of masterful. But I agree that Munchausen is kind of underrated, and it is sad to me that Gilliam doesn't get more credit. That, I mean, as much as I've said a lot of critical things, even his movies that I don't like are an experience, and have interesting things going on and beautiful shots, and Gilliam is so uncompromisingly Gilliam,
Yes, yeah.
that knowing his work is just charming.
I think that's the truth. Is sort of like say that these three stand up as a thematic trilogy, but there's so much more in his filmography that you can go and watch and take stuff from. The guy's a true auteur. That, like you say, he is unflinching in his vision for good or bad, but at least you get that it's his vision. And I don't think he would ever regret that's the final product. If he's successful in getting what he thinks is what he wants out there, then whether it's received well or not, I think he would probably say that's still my vision. It's what I wanted to do. I'm an artist in that respect, and I've got to respect that.
Oh, I agree. And cinema, we've talked before, cinema needs more of that. So, if anyone's listening who is bored with the sort of like Hollywood big budget machine, and how I read a review of The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, who said, which I like far more than most reviewers, but who said, it's a marvelous antiseptic to movies that seem to be written by algorithm.
Yes.
And I think that applies to Gilliam's work as a whole.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's like one of the things I mentioned before. Like, these things happen; they keep you surprised. Like, these are films you can watch time and time again, and you will probably take something different from each of them. Where I won't deny I love mainstream cinema. I love a lot of big action films, big blockbusters, superhero films. I love all that. But like you say, they are getting incredibly predictable and almost written by algorithms. A great way of putting it. Yeah, and I do think.
Let me end with one anecdote about that. As I was watching these, rewatching these with my friend, we made it through Time Bandits and Brazil, and I thought, I really want to see a Transformers movie. I need to cleanse my palate. I've had to do some work, and, there are things I like and things I don't. I really need just something dumb with explosions and a few cool ideas. And then I'll watch one of those, and I'll say, I really need a Terry Gilliam movie.
Yes. I think it's funny. It's I was reading a review. I went to see Pet Sematary, the new Pet Sematary recently, and it's fine. But there's someone related to an anecdote of Stephen King and his sort of self-acknowledgement. And he said, "Well, I am the Big Mac of literature." In an acknowledgement of I'm fast food. And I know my place. I'm not, and that's sort of like say you go and watch a Transformers film, or you can go read a Stephen King book, but then you're gonna want to go and try something that's going to challenge you. And I think that's what these can do. Is they can challenge you and they can make you think.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. This has been a joy, and I learned about these movies talking with you. So, I'm always glad to, talk with you and bounce ideas off. And, I think it's surprising to me how eye to eye we saw. But, I still just, I'm got that observation about the billboards and sort of how they hide the ugly reality, really struck me. And I know I'll keep thinking about what you shared today.
No, I always appreciate you coming on, Julian. It's always a great conversation. This has been an epic one, and it's so good, sort of like say, because these films. There are many sort of reviews and discussions of, like say, mainstream films. I thought these are a good lot to jump into, and I think your point of view has been a fantastic contribution. So thank you again for being on the show.
My pleasure, and I hope everyone checks out your Patreon and supports and subscribes. I really encourage them to do so, and love what you're doing.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, there we have it. Our discussion about the Imagination and Age, or the Age and Imagination Trilogy from filmmaker Terry Gilliam. So in the past 2 episodes, we've discussed him as a filmmaker. We discussed Time Bandits. We discussed Brazil and the adventures of Baron Munchausen. If you've got any thoughts or comments on this trilogy, or even on Terry Gilliam as a filmmaker, please reach out. Let me know what you think. Is he great? Is he a disaster? Is he a bit of a hack? Or is he a genius? You let me know what you think. Also, what's your favourite Terry Gilliam film? What's he contributed to filmmaking? Okay, thank you very much for listening. And if you want to get in contact, remember you can contact us via email. That's 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com, or through the website. So go on the website, 20thcenturygeek.com. Check us out on there. There's all kinds of content on there. We're on the social medias, 20th Century Geek on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Tumblr. Check us out. We're all on there. And more than anything, if you enjoy this show and you've enjoyed the shows before, please pop onto your podcast provider, the podcast catcher you're listening to, iTunes, Podbean, whatever it is, and leave a 5-star review. Let me know how much you love me. That's right, I'm that egotistical. More than that, though, we do have a Patreon page. If you want to show us how much love you want to give, throw a couple of coppers our way, and we can keep the lights on at 20th Century Towers. Greatly appreciated. But if you don't want to go down that route, and if you don't want to check out our Patreon, 20th Century Geek has got an Amazon wish list. All the research and reading and material that goes into these, there's a lot of stuff goes on behind the scenes. If you want to go and check that out, there are all these kind of books and stuff on there that would help us a great deal. And we love second-hand books on 20th Century Geek. So have a look at that. Check it out. In the meantime, have a great time, and I'll see you on the next episode.